So, welcome to In Conversation with WLV Doctoral College. It's yet another session in lockdown. So, you'll find that both Ben and I are currently in our respective homes, trying to record this separately. So today's In Conversation with WLV Doctoral College is all about making comparisons, comparing ourselves to other people and the damage that does to us and our progress as researchers. So we've been chatting about this, haven't we, Ben? We've been talking about how often we compare ourselves to other people and how that's a really difficult thing to do, because really with doctorates there's no standard benchmarks really in terms of progress. The progress that one postgraduate researcher will make will never look the same as the progress another researcher will make, and progression is always going to look different, so we can't really make comparisons in that way.
Yes, I think everybody will move to their own particular timeline. We don't have a uniformity of these things, nor indeed should we. Certain theses will have challenges at earlier moments, certain will have challenges at later moments, and obviously time is allotted accordingly. So I think that, exactly as you say, Deborah, the first thing is that one shouldn't think there's some template and my mate's following it successfully and somehow I'm not, because that isn't how it works at all.
And although we have APRs that have certain benchmarks, the benchmarks are quite loose, aren't they? So we're not saying that in your first APR you should have written your literature review. We're saying at the first APR you should have completed X% of your thesis in draft or rough. So we're not actually saying that, it's the right way to write your thesis, your literature review, then your methodology, then collect your data, because that isn't going to be the way for some people. I've noted as well with some of the supervisions that I do that there's people who start at the same time are almost trying to race each other and see who can submit first. And it isn't about who submits first. It's about who submits who you submit when your thesis is of the right quality and the right standard to submit. So it's not about, I submitted first, because you may not have a favourable outcome just because you rush to get there before somebody else.
So that scenario is quite straightforward. It could be that somebody submits on day one of the writing up year, gets Survivor a month and a half beyond that, gets a resubmission, 12 months of corrections, and suddenly that's taking them forward by quite a substantial timeline. Whereas their friend could submit, say, I don't know, in month 8 of the write-up year, and maybe gets very minor corrections, gets even awarded on the day, so they're done and dusted, who knows, 10 months before their quicker friend. I mean, what you're saying, Deborah, just makes me think that the lesson here often is that quantity isn't quality.
Yes.
And you do find people going around waving a great wad of paper saying, look how much I've written in the last 2 months. Here's my chapters 1 and 2. And that can be quite destabilizing for other people who maybe just have notes, maybe have a sketch, a plan, but they haven't got that kind of wad of writing to show for it. But then the lesson of what we're saying is that you shouldn't necessarily interpret that as some sort of vote of no confidence in your ability to progress. It's quality, it's not quantity.
So that leads us to the next point, which is about writing styles. I often ask the question, oh, hello, I've got my cat again. Sorry about this. We often get asked, or I often ask the question of postgraduate researchers in sessions about how many of them read papers that they don't understand. They sit and they read it over and over again and it still doesn't make sense. And it's because there are long, convoluted sentences, difficult sentence structures, lots of long, complicated terminology or words, and it just isn't an accessible piece of paper. paper to read, and therefore that they often leave feeling that they've failed as opposed to the author. And so for me, there's two really important points here. First of all, that isn't good writing. That's somebody who's been quite elitist, doesn't want research to be accessible to anybody else. And it's almost saying, look at me, aren't I clever? When actually good writing is all about taking something that's very, very complex and making it easy for others to access and understand. So you should be thinking not only of the academic reader, but maybe the end user of your research, reading your thesis, reading your papers. And if you can make your work accessible to them, then you're writing really well. The second part of that is about writing styles. So, it is about, with thesis, don't try and emulate. And I often see with doctoral students, they do try to emulate these very complex writing styles, when actually the art of a good thesis is writing simplistically and accessibly.
Yeah, I agree. There is a bit of emulation. I mean, a thesis will get complicated enough, and you can work, as indeed you should, to make it clear and accessible and unambiguous, and it will still move into areas of complication, because I think that's the nature of PhD study. But I think that you can't necessarily think that because it's complicated to read, that means that you're writing about complicated stuff and people should be impressed. That's not how it works at all. And, having edited many books, I'm very familiar with that tendency. And I'm often asking people just to be clear in dealing with complication. I mean, a good story around this is in the book After Theory by Terry Eagleton, where he says that there is a kind of anti-intellectual bent that would want everything to be in the simplest, most accessible language. But there are times when that simply isn't possible. And he says, imagine you're in an aeroplane and you're flying high above the sea, and you're able to listen into the communication of the pilot communicating with the ground controllers. Well, if the pilot was using language you could understand, that would actually be quite alarming. So if the dialogue between the pilots was, no, go up a bit, no, push the big button, no, pull that out a bit, go left a bit, there's a cloud coming up, you would think they don't know what they're talking about. But when they're talking about various vectors and angles and approaches and various equations, you feel a lot more reassured that the complication evidences an exactitude in what they're doing. But yeah, I think complication for the sake of complication is something that you will be pulled up on fairly quickly. And I agree, Deborah, there is an elitist, slightly snobbish element to it, as if you think that you're talking just to a certain strata of people who are the only ones who can understand this particular language and so on. So yeah, I would keep that in mind around style and clarity.
It's also important in terms of being able to make impact with your research, so that that ability for other people to be able to understand your research and to use your research is the foundations and the pathways to making impact with your work. Mm-hmm. So our final point is comparing outcomes, and often people do. So the reasons why we don't think that this is a good idea is because different universities have different outcomes. So at the University of Wolverhampton, we have a pass outright, which is very, very rare. We have minor modifications, resubmission with Reviver. For PhD students, a resubmission as an award of MPhil, and also for both PhD students and postdocs, the fail. And again, those latter two are very, very rare. So most people come out with corrections of some sort, either minor modifications or a resubmission. But in other universities, There might be minor modifications, might not be 3 months as it is at Wolverhampton, it might be 6 weeks. Or major modifications is an outcome that some people at some universities have, and that's 6 months. So there are different time frames, and there are different outcomes at different universities. So you can't really make comparisons between yourself and your friends at different institutions, and you can't really make comparisons between yourself and people within the organisation, because what might be minor modifications might for another examiner be a resubmission, and it's not an exact science. It's about how much the examiners really think that you're able to do in terms of corrections within 3 months. And you may have examiners who think they're being very, very kind by saying, actually, this might take 3 months, but this is a part-time student, so let's give them a resubmission to make sure that they get the work done on time. So it's not really an exact science. There is quite a lot of there is quite a lot of differences in how people perceive those particular outcomes. And I must say that, I've had students who've been given a resubmission, who've actually done their corrections within 3 months and submitted them within 3 months as if they would have been a minor modification. So just because you've been given one category doesn't mean that you have to take the length of time that you're given by your examiners. That's the maximum and not the minimum. So you submit your corrections when they're completely done. So as long as you submit them within the time frame, it doesn't really matter if you're submitting at 3 months as minor modifications or 3 months as a resubmission. And nobody ever asks you after your doctorate what your outcome was. Was it a minor modification or was it a resubmission? Nobody ever asks that question. You just have the DR in front of your name.
Absolutely, yes. It's all about the architecture put in place to get the thesis completed and awarded. And as you say, there are external variables. I mean, it could be that what pushes an outcome from minor modifications into resubmission is just around software packages that are being used, presentation of data, tables that need to be reformatted, which is just sometimes bureaucratic things and not really a position on the quality or otherwise of the thesis. So I do absolutely agree. And I think that comparing those outcomes as if there's some sort of chart of achievement is somewhat wrong-headed. I think this cat thinks so as well. There we go.
Right. So really the outcome that you're looking at is the fact that you've got a doctorate, and that's the achievement, not whether it's a minor modification, a resubmission, a major modification, or whatever it is in whatever university you're at.
Can we say it's a bit like a driving test?
Yeah.
Like you get it, and no one's saying how often did you take the test. So yeah, maybe that's it.
Okay, so one tip about not comparing yourself with other people, Ben.
The person you need to engage with is your supervisor, not what your irritating friend is saying about their progress. So stick to that person, not the consensus of people hanging around the library telling you they've just written their first 4 chapters, in 1 year.
And just picking up on that point, my tip would be take what other people say with a pinch of salt, because we're all very good at trying to either massage the truth or kind of protect ourselves in these situations as well. So, do take a big pinch of salt when you listen to what other people are doing. So thank you for listening. As always, if you want to hear more from us, do follow our channel and do press the notification button if you want to be told when we release new vlogs. We release new vlogs every Friday, and so you should be hearing from us pretty soon. So thank you for listening, and speak to you again sometime. Bye.
Bye.